When the government spies on reporters and harasses political opponents and revises the truth 12 times, who do you turn to help you straighten it all out, to help you understand what's going on? Well, many people, and I have always turned to Brit Hume from your Fox News channel, who joins us now on the line right now. Good morning, Brit.
Hello, Brian.
Let me start by talking about the AP scandal, because, a lot of people, when you talk about, the Justice Department seized the phone records of a lot of Associated Press reporters in this town. A lot of people don't look at reporters as very sympathetic figures, and they may say, so what? Tell me why this is an important story. Well,
it's important because of the reasons even the administration is willing to concede, which is that, free and as Jay Carney said umpteen times yesterday, unfettered journalism benefits the country, and it's really not even a controversial question. People don't like the press, that's for sure. Administrations don't like the press, but it's in one way or another, the public will generally sympathize with the idea of a free press. And the other thing, Brian, is that people are always skeptical of government snooping. So there'd better be a good reason for it.
Brit, it's interesting, though, that the two of the three scandals that seem to be sucking up so much oxygen in the Beltway right now are Benghazi and the IRS story, and these are two stories that really have been around for months now, both of them from before the election. Is it kind of ironic that suddenly the media is paying attention to something that they could have paid attention to leading up to the election?
Yeah, I would say it's ironic. I'd say it's disappointing that it took this, but I'm glad it's finally happened. The large elements of the mainstream media, principal elements of the mainstream media, paid no attention to these two stories when they, in my view, should have. They particularly refused to cover the Benghazi case, despite the fact that there was quite a lot of obvious material there for plenty of stories.
But they were willing to take the White House's word for it and buy their line until they had a document in front of them that showed them otherwise.
Well, that's right. Although there were things that were said even back at the time, well before the election, that didn't make any sense, that reporters should have pounced on. And I would cite just one particular example. When the president said in that debate that he had called the incident in Benghazi terrorism, basically on day 2 or whenever it was, right after it happened, that didn't make any sense. First of all, if you read what he said, he made a general reference to terrorism at the end of his remarks, which could have been taken to mean he was referring to Benghazi. But then after that, he went back to declining to say it was terrorism for a while. In addition to that, of course, if he thought it was terrorism and said it was terrorism, then the question arises, why did he permit a spokesman for his administration in the person of Susan Rice, the UN ambassador, to go out on those 5 Sunday talk shows days later and say that the whole thing was a result of a protest over a video that got out of hand?
Right.
So, his whole story there never made any sense, and it was just a kind of willful blindness that kept the story from catching on.
All right, so but when you look at these three scandals, you got the Benghazi thing, and all the questions that swirl around that. The AP story, I think that's going to be a really big deal as we go forward. But this IRS matter, where the IRS was harassing conservative groups while ignoring what the other groups on the other side of the political equation were doing, seems to me that if you find the right document, if you have the right whistleblower, this is one that could be huge.
Well, I agree with that. I think it's use of the IRS against people is something that the public worries about and fears, and it's been the subject of major controversy and trouble before. Although Richard Nixon was never impeached, as George Will, I guess, pointed out the other day, one of the articles of impeachment that was drawn up against him had to do with sicking the IRS on people, on political opponents.
Yeah.
And there have been people suspicious that the administration has done this for a long time. What I would say about this, Brian, is that the AP scandal is the one that's got the media most spun up at the moment. Partly that's because it's the freshest one. But I would think that my guess is that that's the one that has the least likelihood of reaching the Obama White House. It may affect Eric Holder in some way, but I don't think it's going to reach. I think it probably won't reach the White House, because if you think about it, the other two scandals were actions carried out that had the effect of furthering the Obama administration's political interests.
Yes.
The AP story doesn't really do that.
Yeah.
I mean, going after the Associated Press is, if it's a leak investigation, well, that's something that people can sympathize with the goal.
Brit Hume's our guest, senior political analyst from Fox News. A quick question. I saw Carl Bernstein yesterday or 2 days ago sort of poo-pooing the idea that the president or the administration would have anything to do with this IRS story, and it was shocking to me. This is Carl Bernstein. He made his oaths on Watergate. Do you see any young journalists out there right now that impress you that could be the next Carl Bernstein or the next Bob Woodward that might actually pull on these threads?
Well, I don't, but of course I remember back at the time I was an investigative reporter myself back in the days of Watergate, and I remember these young guys from the Washington Post coming around, and they were even asking others for help. They called on me at one time, and I didn't, I thought this whole thing with Watergate was underplayed when it broke. But I'm sort of out of the middle of that stuff now, and I'm not really an authority on who's a great investigative reporter. And I would say this about Carl, saying what he said about that is, Carl's an old friend of mine. I like Carl very much, and he did great work on Watergate and some fine work since. But he's kind of set himself up as a sentinel. He guards the door to the Scandal Hall of Fame. And so far, he's only let one scandal in, and that's the Watergate.
That's right.
Some self-interest there.
All right. Well, listen,
Thank
Brit.
you so much, Brit.
It's always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us
You
here.
bet, buddy. Good to talk to you both.
Okay. Bye.